Welcome back. One of my favorite genres to read, judging by my background, is classics. And although I've been slightly slacking on that lately, I did want to make a video talking about my favorites. These will be a mix of standard classics and modern classics, and I thought we just talk about them, and I'll tell you why I love them, and maybe you can tell me the ones that you love and then the ones that I should maybe read. And I also have a huge list of books that are already on my shelf that I haven't read yet, which I should get on that. Anyway, here are the books. These are very well known books, but I think mostly all classics are. I do really want to find more unknown classics, or especially the classics that have been erased from history, and especially the female author voices that have been erased from history. But let me share the ones that I do love. The first one we're going to talk about is The Belgia by Sylvia Plath. And first and foremost, I do want to mention that this has some very racist undertones and statements in it, and probably a lot of these classics will, and also some very sexist and misogynistic, and probably also some very queer phobic comments will be in some of these classics. They are a product of their time, which is an excuse by any means, but I think that's an issue we will face with a lot of classics, just to put that out there. And I do really want to read more independent and important voices, so if you have any recommendations, please do let me know. But let's talk about The Belgia. The reason I love The Belgia I think I just tapped the mic. The reason I love The Belgia so much is because it's still, despite what I just said, it still stands very modern in this day and age. The feeling of a woman going through the motions still stands, and Sylvia Plath depicts that very beautifully, and you can tell that a lot of love and emotion went into this. And so, of course, I think why The Belgia is one of my favorites, and also a lot of other people's favorites, is just because it's very relatable and it reaches a lot of us women just trying to make the way through this very shitty life sometimes. Sylvia Plath did a wonderful job at that. It's a very sad book. Read the trigger warnings, but let me tell you what The Belgia is about. I shall not be summarizing any of these books. I think it would be quite a funny idea for me to one day make a video like summarizing classics, maybe even the ones that I haven't read, just based on what I know about them. But still, also with the books that I love and adore, I don't remember everything, and I sometimes really struggle with summarizing books. I think it would be a funny idea to one day maybe make a video where I try to summarize books without reading the summaries or without researching them beforehand. I don't know, I think it could be quite entertaining, but let me read you the summary. Working as an intern for a New York fashion magazine in the summer of 1953, Esther Greenwood is on the brink of her future. Yet, she's also on the edge of a darkness that makes her world increasingly unreal. Esther's vision of the world shimmers and shifts day to day, living in the sultry city, the graced men friends, the hot dinner dances. The Belgia, Sylvia Plath's only novel, is partially based on Plath's own life. It has been celebrated for its darkly funny and razor-sharp portrait of 1950 society and has sold millions of copies worldwide. And that is The Belgia. And I love this cover, and I know there's also an illustrated version of the book. I really want that. That's so pretty. And you might know The Belgia if you haven't read it yourself, for its very famous fig tree analogy, which is quite popular on TikTok, quite popular in the world. What I also want to do with these classics is, in case any of you haven't read these yet, or if you want to start reading classics, I thought I'd maybe read you the first sentence or the first paragraph, just so you can get a feel for the writing style, and maybe you can decide on from there on if you do want to read it, because classics are something hard to get into. So I'm probably gonna do that for all of these books, just so you get a feel for it. And if you have heard of these books and have always wondered if you would like to read it, I'll read you the first page, not the entire page, but you know what I mean. And one more thing about The Belgia, I think the reason so many people like it as well is just there's so many lines, and I think you can find there's so many lines. Wow, Diana. No, there's so many, not necessarily profound, but there's so many realistic and relatable lines in here about being a woman in the 1950s, and it still, like I said, relates to today, and that just makes those lines even more emotional. I think for the Belger, I'll read you the first paragraph. It was a queer, sultry summer, the summer they electrocuted the Rosenbergs, and I didn't know what I was doing in New York. I'm stupid about executions. The idea of being electrocuted makes me sick, and that's all there was to read about in the paper. Goggle-eyed headlines staring up at me on every street corner and at the fusty, peanut-smelling mouth of every subway. It had nothing to do with me, but I couldn't help wondering what it'd be like, being burned alive all along your nerves. I thought it must be the worst thing in the world. And that's the first line of, well, not the first line, but that's the first few lines of the Belger. If you've been wanting to read the Belger, take this as your sign. I really, truly love this book. I've reread it a couple of times, and I just fall in love with it I fall in love with it more every single time. A lot of my classics are very ugly covers because I tend to just get the cheapest versions if I can't find them secondhand. 1984 version by George Orwell is pretty ugly, but it's what I have. And long period where I didn't read as many classics, which kind of similar to right now, and then I read 1984 really randomly, and I really also randomly loved it a lot, which I didn't expect. And that again just proves why it's a classic. This is the same with Belgium and all of the other books I'll talk about. They just continue to prove why they're classics throughout time, because they just still can be associated and applied to so many new and modern scenarios, even though they were written such a long time ago. This is also, if you're a fan, if you don't know, if you want to get into classics, and if you're a fan of The Hunger Games or any dystopian novel, this is its father, its founding father. Winston Smith rewrites history. It's his job. Hidden away in the records department of the sprawling Ministry of Truth, he helps the party, an omnipresent big brother, control the people of Oceania. But the notebook he's begun to write in is against the rules. In fact, the thought police could arrest him simply for having it. Despite the danger, a seed of rebellion has begun to grow in Winston's heart, one that could have devastating consequences. In George Orwell's final novel, he explores a dystopian future in which a totalitarian government controls the actions, thoughts, and even emotions of its citizens. Its lasting popularity is a statement to Orwell's powerful prose and its passionate warning for today. Let's make Orwell fiction again, shouldn't we? Now, this is another modern classic, and this is maybe in my top 3 out of these, out of all of these books I'm going to talk about. And I cannot believe I still haven't read any other work of this author, and this is James Baldwin's Giovanni's Room. Now, let me tell you about Giovanni's Room. David, a young American in 1950s Paris, is waiting for his fiancée to return from vacation in Spain. But when he meets Giovanni, a handsome Italian barman, the two men are drawn into an intense affair. After 3 months, David's fiancée returns, and, denying his true nature, David rejects Giovanni for a safe future as a married man. His decision eventually brings tragedy. Full of passion, regret, and longing, this story of a fated love triangle has become a landmark in gay writing, but its appeal is broader. James Baldwin caused outrage as a black author writing about white homosexuals, yet for him, the issues of race, sexuality, and personal freedom were eternally intertwined. That's Giovanni's Room, and like I said, I shall read you the first line. And I really do want to reread this soon, and I might do that this summer, so in the following months. I stand at the window of this great house in the south of France as night falls, the night which is leading me to the most terrible morning of my life. I have a drink in my hand, and there is a bottle at my elbow. I watch my reflection in the darkening gleam of the window pane. My reflection is tall, perhaps rather like an arrow. My blonde hair gleams. My face is like a face you have seen many times. My ancestors conquered a continent, pushing across death-laden plains until they came to an ocean which faced away from Europe into a darker past. And that's the first line of Giovanni's Room, and truly, There's many great lines in here. It's on my mind a lot of times, especially when I consume modern day queer media. This is always at the back of my mind. Now, the next book is one of the most well-known classics and one of the most, dare I say, misunderstood classics, and it's Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley, absolute icon. If you don't know anything about Mary Shelley, I urge you to look her up and read just a bit into who she was, and it's the great young girl she was at her time. Why do I say that Frankenstein is a highly misunderstood novel? First of all, for some reason people tend to call the monster Frankenstein, which I know is a heavily discussed topic, but why the fuck? That's not the monster's name. I called him a monster, and I just think he's very misunderstood, dare I say. And I really want to reread this. But whenever I think about rereading classics, I also think about all of the classics I still haven't read, and then I get into a bit of a spiral on which ones I actually should read. Anyway, if you're unfamiliar with the actual story of Frankenstein, I saw the pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together. I saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out, and then, on the working of some powerful engine, show signs of life and stir with an uneasy, half-vital motion. A summer evening's ghost story, lonely insomnia in a moonlit alpine room and a runaway imagination, fired by philosophical discussions with Lord Byron and Percy Bysshe Shelley about science, galvanism, and the origins of life, conspired to produce for Mary Shelley this haunting night spectre. By morning it had become the gem of her romantic masterpiece, Frankenstein. That is Frankenstein, and I shall read you the first line as well. You will rejoice to hear that no disaster has accompanied the commencement of an enterprise which you have regarded with such evil forebodings. I arrived here yesterday, and my first task is to assume my dear sister of my welfare, and increase confidence in the success of my undertaking. That's all. It's written in a letter, and that's Frankenstein. And I kind of actually really like this copy, even though it's falling apart. Already briefly mentioned, I have to include it on this list. Will forever hold a special place in my heart, and it's truly Oscar Wilde, one of my favorites. Very basic, I know. A lot of these, all of these, very basic, but they're classics for a reason. Anyway, this is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I did want to mention very briefly that if you want to get into Oscar Wilde but don't want to commit to a full story yet, Penguin has this great little bound classic called the Star Child Collection. Beautiful. And this is a collection of some of Oscar's magical realism fantasy children stories, somewhat of that. And they're very beautiful and very sweet, and a lot of great symbolisms in here. And I think these are a great way to get into Oscar's writing if you are just getting started into classics. That's just something I wanted to mention. There's a lot of brilliant stories in here. Oh, I really have to reread The Picture of Dorian Gray, and also right behind me, I hope it's on camera, is the uncensored version of Dorian Gray with all of the stuff that was cut from the original publication, which I haven't read yet, but I've heard a lot of great things about, and I think if I will read this, I will reread that version. Anyway, let's talk about what it's about. A story of evil, debauchery, and scandal. Oscar Wilde's only novel tells of Dorian Gray, a beautiful yet corrupt man. When he wishes that the perfect portrait of himself would bear the signs of aging in his place, the picture becomes this hideous secret, as it follows Dorian's own downward spiral into cruelty and depravity. The Picture of Dorian Gray is a masterpiece of the evil in men's heart, and is as controversial and alluring as Wilde himself. Oh my god, I have a... Oh my god. Wait, how long has that been in here? Me and my best friend. Let me put that somewhere safely. One of the most well-known classics for many great reasons. Oscar Wilde knew how to write, let me tell you that. Now this is a very recent read and very recently famous classic, and it's none other than Dostoevsky with White Nights. And it got big on TikTok, I think, because of Jack Edwards, and he said something along the lines of, if you never know love until you've read White Nights, and he was very right by saying that. And I'll read you what the back says, and then of course I'll read you the first page or first line, whatever, like I said. Two devastating Russian stories of solitude, unrequited love, and depravity from beyond the grave. This has two stories in there. I didn't like the second one all that much, but the first one, White Nights, is absolutely brilliant and tore my heart to pieces. This version is translated by Ronald Meyer, and I'm so glad that I'm reading you the first lines because White Nights has one of my favorite opening lines ever. It's the following. It was a wonderful night, the kind of night, dear reader, which is only possible when we are young. The sky was so starry, it was such a bright sky that looking at it, you could not help but ask yourself, I love it. Is it really possible? It was a wonderful night. Is it really possible, dear reader, which is only possible when we are capricious people? The sky was so starry. And the last classic should be no surprise to anyone who knows anything about me, and that is the fact that I love Dracula by Bram Stoker. I have 3 copies of this and reread it a couple of times, seen it in theaters, seen in any of the adaptations, and know way too much about Bram Stoker, know way too much about all of the interpretations and symbolism in here, and will continuously to do so and fall in love with retellings like the Dowry of Blood and whatever. I love the story. I'll read you the summary just because it's that iconic, and you probably know a lot about Dracula, but I also know some people in real life who just recently learned about the literal story behind it via me. Because some people just, of course, know the name Dracula, but don't know the story because they've never watched the movies or whatever. Earnest and naive, solicitor Jonathan Harker travels to Transylvania to organize the estate of the infamous Count Dracula at his crumbling castle. Finding himself imprisoned, Harker experiences all manner of supernatural horrors until he eventually escapes to be reunited with his fiancée, Mina. Meanwhile, in England, Mina's friend Lucy has been bitten, and Mina herself is under threat from the Count as he attempts to quell his appetite for human blood. Arguably the most enduring Gothic novel of the 19th century, Bram Stoker's Dracula is as chilling today in its depiction of the vampire world and exploration of Victorian values as it was at its time of publication. I love this book. Not that many, but for this much of a book, and I also tend to forget to do the thing that I'm about to show you. Docky had many pages. I don't know if the camera's picking it up. Just randomly flip the page open, and my annotation says, Dracula, honey, that's gay. I love Dracula so much, and as I was reading, I just remembered that I'm missing legitimately my all-time favorite classic, which I know I just said was Dracula. But that's because I don't have the book on my shelf, so I forgot about it. Okay. Because my other all-time favorite classic predates Dracula by 20 years, and that's Camilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. And because I don't have the book with me, I shall tell you some more about it. The main character of Camilla is called Laura, and Laura lives on this huge Gothic mansion estate with her father, and one day there's a road accident, and they take in this girl called Camilla, and Laura strangely seems to remember Camilla from her childhood nightmares. And while she is remembering those nightmares, she is also noticing that a lot of people are going missing and getting a fever in her town, and she gets obsessed and smitten with Camilla, and we just follow their story and the twists and turns of Camilla's true nature being revealed. And I'll quickly look up if I can find the first line, because that'd be great. But I think out of all of these, Camilla should be more well known, especially because it predates Dracula, and it's sapphic. Legit, it's sapphic, and it's vampires, and it's just really sexy and gothic and beautiful. For Camilla, I shall not read you the first line, but just a random line. I'll read you one of my favorite lines, which I'm so glad I just found online. You will think me cruel, very selfish, but love is always selfish. The more ardent, the more selfish. How jealous I am, you cannot know. You must come with me, loving me to death or else hate me and still come with me. And hating me through death and after, there's no such word as indifference in my apathetic nature. I love this book. And those are all the classics I wanted to talk about today. There are, of course, many other classics that I love and adore, like I previously mentioned, Little Woman. I also really am a big fan of the little mini classics, and I just recently, not that recently actually, read Jane Eyre, which I absolutely loved. I can also tell you about the classics I didn't like. The Great Gatsby. But those are the classics I absolutely love, and I hope it was interesting to hear about, and maybe you can discuss some of these in the comments, and you can tell me if you hated any of these, because I also love to hear that, and please tell me your favorite classic. See you in the next one.